Okay, I think we're ready to go. So welcome everyone to this event tonight. My name's Sandra Kentish. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chair of the Victorian Division and delighted tonight to bring you our session on challenges in the agricultural and food sector. This is a joint event presented both by the Victorian Division and the Agriculture and Food Forum of ATSE. It'll profile a number of recent winners of the ICM Agrifoods Award. To commence, I would like to, though, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this event is taking place. That's the Wurundjeri people, and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and families. But I'm going to hand over now to Paul Wood, who'll be our chair. Paul is the Deputy Director of the Ag and Food Forum and also a board member of ATSE. He's received many awards over his career, but I'd note in particular that he was the recent 2022 Eureka Prize winner for Outstanding Mentor of Young Researchers, recognising his work in particular in establishing the Guinness program within ATSE. But I'll hand over to Paul. Thank you very much, Sandra.
And I was very pleased last week at ATSE to pick up my new Imminence badge. So thank you very much, and great to be here tonight, and great to see a lot of young people joining us. I said to our three winners, you'll recognise who the fellas are because they're generally about 20 years older than you. So it's great to see all the faces today. So as I said, tonight we're actually taking advantage of bringing back three of our ICM award winners, and I'll just talk a little bit about the award. So the ICM Agrifoods Award came to the Academy under the generous sponsorship of Doug Shears. So Doug's also a fellow, and I thank Doug for his support, but also to Lindsay Favey, who headed up the group who developed this award. Lindsay sends his apologies. Unfortunately, Trop Ag is happening up in the towns, Queensland, somewhere up north, and he's up there, so he sends his apologies. And it was first actually structured. The first award was in 2017, and only just recently, actually last week, we had the 2022 awards. And I'm pleased to say that Zoe Doubleday and George Chen, George is with us today, were awarded the ICM award. So tonight we've got, as I said, three of the previous awards. We've got James Hunt, who actually was one of the original recipients in 2017. James said he slightly slipped over the 40-year cutoff now, only just a little bit. Lydia Ong from 2019 and Anja van der Wal from 2018 will talk to us tonight. So the format, just to give you an idea. So we've asked each of the speakers to just talk for 5 minutes about what they're doing and what their research is. You'll see a couple of slides, but it's just to give you an idea. So it'll be 5 minutes from each of them. And then we're going to go into a bit of a panel discussion, and we're going to try to lift the discussion above what they're necessarily doing, but take advantage of what they're seeing in their fields. So start asking some questions about the broader ag and food sector. We thought that would appeal to the whole audience, because we're a breadth of STEM people in the audience tonight. So that's our format, and obviously at some stage we'll give the opportunity for questions from the audience as well. But that's the idea of the format, and we've got a couple of interesting questions to kick that off. So with that, I'll ask James to come and talk to us.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to the Academy for holding the event and for the invite. So yeah, I am James Hunt, and I'm a professor in agronomy here at the University of Melbourne. And when I say that I work in agronomy or I am an agronomist, first question usually is, oh, what's agronomy? And it's a fair enough question, because it's a very sort of broad description for what a lot of different people do in their professional roles. But I guess I'm a research agronomist, and research agronomists use scientific understanding of farming systems and scientific method to try and improve the productivity or the profitability or the sustainability of those systems. And so generally speaking, that's that's what I do. So that's the higher level explanation. And if people still stare at me blankly, I say, have you ever looked at a packet of vegetable seeds? And they usually say, oh yeah. So if you turn it over, there's instructions on the back with what to do with the seeds. That's agronomy. But someone's worked out what those instructions should be by doing experiments and understanding the physiology of the crop and how that interacts with the environment. So yeah, that's loosely speaking what I do. And I suppose the key feature of agronomy is that it's not a focused disciplinary science. It's very much a generalist, integrative kind of profession. And to me, that's where I see the role that agronomists can really play with in the future, and the challenges that the world has around food security and also greenhouse gas emissions. Our role is as integrators rather than necessarily being discoverers of new knowledge. And I sort of, with several of my colleagues, John Kierkegaard and Corinne Celestina and Kenton Porker, sort of wrote a book chapter recently for a book that was published by the Australian Society of Agronomy on what we call transformational agronomy, which is how we sort of think agronomists should best apply themselves to meet some of the challenges that we have in the future. And I guess that, yeah, our conclusion was that we are integrators and we are generalists, and we're not discoverers of knowledge. In many ways, we sort of behave less like sort of pure research scientists and more like engineers, really, in what we do. And so probably the best role for us, what we are very good at is talking to farmers and understanding farming systems and the challenges of farming systems, what the constraints are and what the problems are. And usually, because we've got broad general knowledge, we also understand who to talk to in our research institutions or in commercial companies that might have very specific discipline knowledge or skills that could help to solve those problems. And so that's sort of the way that we sort of conduct our research, is that we as agronomists talk to farmers, understand the systems, work out what the problems are, possible solutions, possible opportunities, and then we need to form teams, research teams, to address those challenges. And usually the big sort of challenges need people from multiple disciplines to be able to achieve that. And a recent example of that in my own research is the GRDC National Phenology Initiative, where we wanted to help growers better match crop life cycle to environmentally optimal conditions. There's sort of very poor recommendations for sowing time for the back of the vegetable seed packet stuff. So we had a very large multidisciplinary team that involved some agronomists, but also crop physiologists, a lot of modelers, sort of wheat and barley geneticists and genomic people and computational analysis to do controlled environment experiments to get some sort of basic parameters for the models, to do really big complicated field experiments to have data to validate the models. And then we also got SNP data from all the cultivars, and the sort of genomics people and computational scientists could use their fancy machine learning and prediction, genomic prediction to derive the parameters without even needing the original input data. So yeah, we're sort of close to delivering that. And to me, that really is an example of how agronomists and agronomy should fit in meeting the challenges of the future. Is that my 5 minutes, Paul?
I wasn't timing. I'm supposed to be timing out.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
You don't want to not time a professor.
I'm still working out what a agronomist was. So, Lydia, sorry. I assume you've seen the bio, so I thought
I think you need to share the screen. Yeah. Oh, okay. And you know what you're doing.
I thought I saw some slides to show you some pretty images. And it is also easier to talk about my work by means of these images. Let me just try and share. It's working. So good evening. So yeah, it's fascinating whatever James is talking about. So let me start.
You might want to stand in front of the lectern so people
Okay.
can see. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. No, I can move. We just can't quite see you.
I think they can. I can see
Can
the
you see
camera.
it?
Yeah.
I can't see it
So,
up here.
yeah, all good. Okay, so this one start by starting.
There is a slide. You might have.
You might have to go back off slideshow.
Let me start by giving a bit of background information about myself and also the pathway to becoming a cheese researcher. So it's all started from the love of chocolate. As a little girl, I had a dream to work in a chocolate factory. So I enrolled in food science degree. But while I was doing my projects with the University of RMIT University, the desire and idea to make food more nutritious and healthier kind of led me to my PhD degree, investigating the health properties of probiotic cheddar cheese. And so my journey shifted from chocolate to cheese. And this cheese journey continues after graduations. I then joined the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Melbourne. And since then, I have been a part of Dairy Innovation Hub and have the privilege of working with wonderful people within the hub and also with dairy manufacturing company here locally and also with international manufacturing companies. So just to put my research in context, dairy manufacturing is a significant industry for our economy. And as you can see here, we export a lot of dairy products, especially to China and Southeast Asia. So with that come many, many challenges. So at Dairy Innovation Hub, we try to provide support for our manufacturer by providing scientific and engineering solutions so that they can increase shelf life of products for export, increase productivity and efficiency so that they can overcome challenges that come with skill shortages, climate change, and sustainability. So how does my project help the challenges in dairy manufacturing? So at Dairy Innovation Hub, we develop a microscopy toolbox that enable us to look at structure of dairy product or food product at really, really small scale. As you can see at micron scale. And then we then correlate these structure attributes to the quality and functionality of the food product. So essentially trying to understand how structure affect the functionality of the food. And these insights have been used by manufacturers to optimize product quality, reduce waste, control quality across supply chain, and also to improve productivity and sustainability. So let me show you just a couple of examples. So in this first example, we use microscopy to benchmark cream cheese productions. So we can see here the evolution of structure from milk during processing all the way to cream cheese. So the fat appears red, protein appears green. Now, by understanding how processing affect the microstructure of the product, we can then use specific processing parameter to tailor microstructure and also tailor different texture of cheese. So for example, here, we can use fermentation pH to change the size of the aggregates or the corpuscular structure, the aggregates of fat and protein, and then in turn change the cheese texture. So we can essentially help manufacturers to tailor texture for different applications and different customer needs. During COVID-19, which is, not sure why the cheese video is going sideways, but you can imagine it's cheese being stretched. Yeah, so during COVID-19, as we all know, our whole supply chain and the distribution have been heavily interrupted. Now, for mozzarella cheese, prolonged storage leads to structure degradation and loss in functionality or the ability for the cheese to stretch. So at Dairy Innovation Hub, we also work with manufacturers to find optimal way to prevent this loss in functionality. For example, by using low temperature storage and put the product to sleep and then recover them when we need to distribute them to consumer. And at the other end of supply chain, we also use microscopy to provide quality assurance measures for our export products such as cream cheese. And this can prevent also product loss at foreign ports, especially if the export product doesn't meet the custom standards. So you can see how the ability to control quality can be quite important for our export product, particularly for our cheese that's worth close to $1 billion for our economy. And just lastly, this is a project that I've been involved in for a couple of years as well, just in the production of cream cheese. As you can see, we generate a lot of liquid acidic byproducts called acid weight. So we use membrane technology to concentrate milk so that we can generate more cheese and reduce the generation of acid weight to increase productivity. I just also want to mention another project led by Professor Sander Kantis and Dr. George Jens, the recent ICM winner, also look at how we can best utilize these liquid byproducts and turn it into valuable ingredients. So hopefully we can see these various approaches help in the growth and profitability of our cream cheese export as well as the environmental sustainability. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and please everybody in the group.
So Angela's our 2018.
Whoa, the 2 years don't count because of COVID.
That's
So
right. You get to take those off.
that's right. I think it's fair to say we're all disappointed that no cheese was bought. Also, I go a long way to helping the profitability of the cheese industry. So, especially during COVID, I got a lot of cheese delivered to my house. So I would argue that I'm somewhere in between both of the two speakers that we've already had. So I'm a senior researcher here at the University of Melbourne, but I'm based in Horsham with my colleague Steve, who I've dragged along tonight because we're here for meetings tomorrow to discuss the next 5 years of our funding. And we take a genome to paddock approach to looking at a disease of canola. So canola is the pretty yellow crop that you see during spring, flowering away, that everyone blames their hay fever on, which is not canola, apparently. And so we work on a disease called blackleg. And essentially, if you don't control this disease, we don't have a canola crop. So back in the 70s, when canola was first introduced into Australia, as the crop was establishing, blackleg came in and wiped out the entire industry. And then it was another 20 years or so before breeding programs got put into place and we started to then be able to control the disease. And so between the research that Steve does and myself, we are aiming to develop strategies for growers to really minimise the impact of the disease. We do this through genetics, through fungicides, and through cultural practices. So my research, I come from a genetics background. I did my PhD here at the university, looking at insecticide resistance. So I came across to the blackleg world, bringing that knowledge and looking at what genes are involved in disease in the pathogen, and then how we can use that to sort of manipulate the population out in the field and really reduce that disease. And so through that work, we developed a strategy called rotation of resistance groups, and we give information to growers so they can look at their cultivars, work out what resistance genes they have, and after a few years, they can then select varieties with a different resistance gene so that the pathogen population is constantly having to change and evolve to keep up with the farmers. We then also use that information to help give advice on when to put on fungicides. Are they going to get an economic return or not? What timings they should do? And then, like I said, cultural practices. So that's where we can do things like isolate our crops from last year's stubble. We can rotate with different crops, things like that. So our research really takes in all those things, and then we do a lot of work with extension through the agronomy programs that GRDC fund, really to get that information out to growers. In terms of our research itself, we are funded through the Grains Research and Development Corporation. So that's a levy-based funding. So essentially the farmers are paying for our research. So our outputs are really industry driven. So whilst I'm based at the university and therefore should be publishing papers and high impact science and things like that, at the end of the day, my salary comes from growers, and therefore my research really has to have that applied knowledge and be able to make farmers money. And so the best example of that, and one of the reasons why I won the award, is back in 2012, our research indicated that a particular resistance gene was about to be overcome by disease. And so we gave a warning out to the growers on the Eyre Peninsula. The growers listened to our warning and they changed to a completely different cultivar. When we came back to our monitoring sites the next year, there was 100% yield loss in those varieties. And so we estimated that we saved around $13 million for growers in that one region. So we really do have that applied and economic benefit for those growers, and that's really the focus of the research that we do. And so that's one of the challenges for me, being based at the university where we're very academically driven. My research really has to have that applied aspect to it, and so I'm constantly having those fights with the university in terms of how to sell myself, and that's where these sort of awards come into play. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. people online, we're just going to have to change settings for a moment. So I have the 3 speakers come up the front.
Projector shining right in the
Yeah, that's great. Oh, is the projector not getting turned off?
No, because we've got. I think I'm about here. Please come sit down.
No, it's not. I'm sure. I'm fine.
Oops. Now, Paul, you're sitting there. Let me just. Okay. Oops. My day job is not as a camera person. So my apologies to everybody. No, you're a bit dark. There you go.
All right.
Okay.
Is everything fine for people online? I don't know how we maybe put it in the chat function. Just if it's not, put it in. Okay. That's your time's up. So. All right. Thank you very much. So I think you've seen a really nice illustration of the breadth of science that the ICM Awards has supported, and 3 excellent presentations on what's happening in the ag sector. And it's great that they're actually across a broad area. We went from sort of manufacturing and agronomy to sort of really boots on the ground sort of feedback to farmers. So I think that was a really nice group of talks. So I've got a couple of questions to warm up, and then I'm expecting you guys to do some work and come up with some intelligent questions as well. And online, if you put it in the chat, then someone will remind me. If you've got a question, please put it in the chat. All right. Is that to say we're fine, or they can't hear us?
Yeah, that was to say we're fine.
They're fine. Okay, so let's start off. So I want to go back to the award, and I want to just talk to each of the award winners and just ask, like, what has it meant for your careers winning this award? And James, might start with you.
It's probably 2 major things. So first thing is even just the act of putting in a nomination is a good thing, because you're having to sell yourself, which people don't like doing. I don't like doing it. Most people don't. To survive in a university environment or many other environments, you need to be able to do. So it lets you, helps you practice that skill. And usually, because someone's nominating you, you're working with a senior person who's been around a while and can help you to do that. So that's certainly a functional thing of it. And the other, it was also helps expand your networks. I guess it's the other way it's helped my career. So met Lindsay Felby for the first time, and reconnected with various other people at the ceremony.
So Angela.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for me specifically, as I mentioned, being industry focused but in an academic situation, I really need to prove that. So normally, if you're going to sell yourself in an academic situation, you would put up your impact factors, your citations, and all those things. And because I don't have that as a strong part of my research, being able to put forward that my research is being extended and used to industry is how I sell myself, and you have to have evidence for that. And I guess an award like this is a very strong evidence of that. And so I think that's a very big benefit to the situation. I agree, the awards night was awesome. I had a great time. Might have drank too much, but that's okay. But it was a great networking, and it's in networking outside of your usual network. So you can go to a conference and meet similar-minded researchers and things like that, but going to an event like that where it's all those different fields and it's people that you would never normally associate with was a really good opportunity.
Thank you. Lillian.
Yeah, for me, it was such an honor to be recognized for our work. Personally, it's quite rewarding to travel to regional Victoria and work with dairy manufacturing companies, especially to see our research being translated to manufacturing scale, or the results of our analysis impact the decision making that provide benefits for the company. So those are very rewarding and satisfying for me already. But to be recognized for our work, that is just like icing on the cake. It also provides more visibility for our work, not just in the dairy manufacturing community, but also in the agriculture field as well. Remember, we got media interview, chains of tweets from different organizations industry magazine and also community magazines talking about our humble success stories, not just here locally, but also in rural Victoria, like in Cobram, Yarrawonga, and in Shepparton. So hopefully those small, humble success story can motivate young women to also pursue career in the agriculture industry, or to motivate young graduates to consider employment in with the manufacturing company. Or maybe they can come to us as well to pursue research degree or postgraduate study, and taking the challenge to do projects that have real impact for the agriculture industry. So yeah, it has been quite positive, and of course the networking and the evening, the gala evening is wonderful. I have my parents there as well, so it's wonderful to see, for them to see what I'm doing. But it has been very positive, I think, not just for me, the group, and also hopefully for the wider community.
Thank you very much. I think they're great responses. I should have mentioned earlier too, the other thing that we're seeing, we had the event last week in Sydney as part of the sort of Activate conference. It was great to see everyone to come together. We don't often frock up and celebrate science, and that was really what the opportunity was, to get out as a big group and celebrate science. And sort of reminds me of an old Peanuts cartoon, where Linus is talking and he's saying, why don't we value scientists as much as we value sports people? And he's asking Lucy this question. She said,
We don't look as good in lycra.
"Oh," she said, "but would you pay $10 to see a scientist?" It's one of our problems, our image. But also, the other thing that happened last week is one of our 2020 winners of this award, Professor Michelle Colgrace, was made a fellow. So that's the other thing that we're trying to develop through this, is really promote and help people in their career. So that's one of the great things to see. We're actively looking for a younger group coming into the fellowship to renew the fellowship. So it was great to see that happening. All right, let's move on to some of the big issues. So what's the biggest issue in food and ag? And that's sustainability. So what I'd like each of you to tell us about is, and in your field, where do you think the greatest gains in sustainability are going to come from? And Angela, we might start with you on this one. I know, because you have the answer.
For James.
I've gone first the last 2 times.
I don't actually know the answer to that question. It's going to be my answer. I think there's a lot of issues that need to be addressed, workforces and things like that, which is going to always be a limiting factor in sustainability and all those things. And so I don't actually know what the answer is.
All right, so you can work on your answers, because we're going to get to workforce in a minute. So I want a better answer when we get to workforce. James.
I think probably, well, I think agronomy has a real role to play in the role that nitrogen has in crop production, because that's very key to making sure that we can grow enough of the staple crops to feed the world. So about half of the world's population wouldn't exist if it wasn't for nitrogen fertilizer. So the human race is kind of addicted to it in a way, but it's also the biggest source of a lot of our carbon emissions, because it's carbon intensive to manufacture, and you also and environmental losses of it, particularly through denitrification into nitrous oxide. Yeah, nitrous oxide is a very potent greenhouse gas. So it sort of sits at this big nexus of sustainability and being environmental challenge around global warming, but being able to grow enough food to sustain the human population. And the sort of real irony of it is that if you don't use it, then you start mining soil organic nitrogen, which drags down your soil organic matter and soil organic carbon, and you emit that carbon as carbon dioxide. So you make greenhouse gas emissions if you do use it, and you make greenhouse gas emissions if you don't use it. And if you don't use it, you can't feed the population. So there's a lot to untangle and sort of make very regionally specific, sensible management interventions to make sure that we're minimising the environmental harm and the sustainability, but maximising the production and the food gains.
See, told you.
Well, I thought that's where you're going to go, because the whole idea of better cultivars, that require less nitrogen, that require less water. As I said, we've probably moved away from that sense of let's just get something that grows really fast. And
yeah, there kind of is no cultivar that requires less nitrogen.
And they've been looking for it for a long time.
The cultivar that requires less nitrogen is the cultivar that yields less.
Yeah.
So if you want more yield, you need more nitrogen. And so yeah, there's no way of escaping it. It's challenging.
So, Lydia, in the manufacturing, what's manufacturing going to do in this space?
Yeah, well, I want to say I don't know, but
You're not allowed to say that, apparently.
No.
But let me share what the sustainability framework that are provided by Australia Dairy Plan. They actually provided a framework of blueprints for manufacturer. They focus on different aspects, but I want to highlight several of them. So first in the framework is to provide sustainable, profitable business, and then to also improve the workforce, the well-being, livelihood of the workforce, and also the livelihood of people in the community, to provide best care for animals. And the last one but not least is to provide, to reduce the environmental impact of our productions. And I just want to highlight a little bit about the last point there, to reduce environmental impact. So the Dairy Manufacturers Sustainability Council, DMSC, in 2012, they set a goal for manufacturer. And in this goal, it highlights three key areas. The first one is to reduce carbon emissions by 30% in 2030. And this 2030 is in line with United Nations sustainability goals. And also the second one is to reduce intensity of water, and also by 30% in 2030, and to reduce the waste. Yeah. So as manufacturers and also dairy community, we know that we are responsible and we have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, because it has been linked to climate change. So I'm also interested to see how they perform 10 years after they set the goals. So I look at their scorecard, their annual report, to see how they perform. And I was quite actually surprised and very happy with their progress. So 10 years running, they have managed to reduce manufacturing greenhouse gas emission by 24%, also reduce the consumption of water by 6%, and also the last one is 93% of waste has been diverted from landfill. So I think it was quite remarkable achievement, and which shows that the manufacturer and dairy industry want to reduce this environmental impact. And I think the framework helped them to focus on area where they can work on, and I'm sure they are on their way to achieve their goal in 2030.
Excellent. And I should declare I am on the dairy board, so I didn't bring the cheese, but all board members do cheese. And I didn't write that piece. It's very good, and it's very true. So yeah, the dairy industry has a goal of reduction of greenhouse gases by 30% by 2030. The red meat industry has a goal of net zero by 2030. The pork industry has decided to get out in front, and they're going to go net zero by 2025. And I think the chicken industry has snuck in, and they're going to go somewhere in the middle of that. So, for people who might look out there and say, what are we doing? All of our big ag industries are aggressively pushing on sustainability. And that's one of the key messages.
Can I be controversial?
Yeah.
So I grew up on a dairy farm. My dad's been on the board of Murray Goulburn. So he's just got back from Holland. And the way they've approached this is that they have decided that they're just going to sell half the size of the dairy industry in Holland to meet these goals, which is fine. They then meet their goals. But the reality is you've still got the need to feed people and still want those things. So then all of a sudden that's going to mean potentially that Australia has to produce more to export. So whilst one country might be meeting those goals, it's not really solving the problem. It's just putting it onto someone else. And I think that that's a big issue, that some of these things can't be dealt with at an individual level. It needs to be coming from a holistic approach, because if you do things like that, all it's doing is transferring the problem to someone else.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a really good point. Often what gets lost in this debate on sustainability is the global south. So we don't fix what's happening in Asia, particularly, you know, dairy, India, largest dairy population in the world, largest dairy industry in the world. 2 to 4 litres of milk per cow, it's 20 to 30 litres here. So if you think about the carbon footprint per litre of milk, it's huge there compared to here. So there's a lot we can actually do, keeping our animals healthy, a bit of genetics. So there's actually a lot, and there's actually groups in Australia who are working in India in the dairy industry, helping that. You go into Africa, I just finished chairing the GALPED. We work with smallholder farmers in Africa. Again, disease is taking out whole groups of animals. Beautiful study recently showing that vaccination of chickens with Newcastle disease, not only did it reduce mortalities, but it put more proteins into diet, and they got an increase in cognitive ability. So we had a study that went from a vaccination of a chicken to cognitive outcomes in children. It was a fantastic. So it shows that connectivity. And you're right.
But then, you know, if the research being done here and then being applied, so for India, for example, if the dairy industry in Australia was helping India bring down their emissions, is that offset on our?
No.
See, but if you did something like that, then obviously...
It's not the way the accounting works, unfortunately.
It's not, but it would help to increase, because the reality is, whilst we're working on our emissions, we're not going to bother helping India try and bring down theirs. And if we were doing it on more of a global scale, maybe we would have more success.
I suppose the comment I'd say is we are doing it on a global scale. There are groups around the world. The Gates Foundation is one of the largest funders in the agricultural system. They put about $500 million US per annum into ag, largely in the global south.
Yeah.
So there are international efforts in that space. And there are a lot of Australian scientists. We've got ACIR, we've got the Crawford Foundation, you know, a number of ag fellows here involved in the Crawford Foundation, been working particularly in the Pacific for a long time. And I'm sure if we didn't have Trop Ag, some of them would probably be here to tell you, they can tell you more about what the Crawford Foundation is doing. So there's some big things. Let's bring it back a bit to local. And as you raised a really good point, workforce. I mean, there's not an ag system out there. There's not probably too many industries that aren't suffering badly from workforce shortages. And it's not just the numbers, it's actually the skill sets. And last week, part of the Activate was a STEM-driven future. What are the skills we're going to need in the future? When you think about ag, it's no longer just physical labor. You know, a modern farm now, it doesn't matter what you're farming, is a pretty sophisticated operation. You know, not only just the crops you plant, how much fertilizer, energy, you know, water utilization, all of these things you're supposed to manage now. So that was one of the things that came out last week is that we're actually going to need different skill sets. And James, you won't be sorry, when I was on the ag group that looked at this area, agronomy was one of the ones that singled out. You'd be one of the sort of almost the old, you know, sort of, you know, we're just not training them anymore. So I want to get into that area about what are the skill sets in your area when you're looking. What are the skill sets that you think we desperately need to be trained? And we might start with you.
Yeah, with the increasing use of technology, as you mentioned, I think we need skilled operators on manufacturing sites, skilled operators to manage all this technology. Yeah, so I guess those are very scary, not only just before COVID. I know it's already, you know, we already have very limited people before COVID, but the COVID situation made it even worse. Yeah, so I guess getting more people to be excited working in the agriculture or dairy industry would be the key. And I've noticed recently, Dairy Australia just launched a campaign just in September, so just 2 months ago. So this campaign the theme is Dairy Jobs Matter. So in that campaign, they interview skilled workers, dairy farmers, and also skilled workers, dairy manufacturing workers, factory workers, and even overseas skilled as well that come and work with them. So they interview these people. So the goal is just trying to get everybody excited about a job in the rural or regional Victoria or Australia, and also in the dairy industry. So I encourage everybody to have a look because they delivered this campaign through media, social media, YouTube, and also other means. So have a look because it's quite interesting. Maybe even circle them so that we can, start the communications with people, even with our maybe our students, our young graduates, so that they also can get excited and so manufacturer can get all these skilled people to do their factory.
James, where are we going to get the agronomists for the future?
That's a really good question, and it sort of relates to some of the things we've touched on already, which Angela mentioned, which is the fact, the reason why there aren't many agronomists being trained anymore is because there's not many agronomists in universities anymore, because universities haven't valued them for the exact same reasons that Angela's described, and I've described, because not pure science discovery people, we're not publishing fancy papers in Nature, we're spending a lot of time talking with farmers, going to field days and writing ATSE update papers and everything else. And that hasn't been appreciated in universities, so it's been difficult for agronomists to progress. But more critically, universities have looked around and said, who are we going to employ in our ag department if it still exists? And it's like, oh, do we employ the agronomist that pumps out a few main papers in a local journal once a year, or do we employ the molecular biologists or the fix of nitrogen testing or something like that? So it's been the decisions often that universities have made that have led to that lack of teaching expertise, which has led to a lack of graduate expertise, which we're facing now. Yeah, like agronomists are just in massive demand. I get phone calls and emails from commercial agronomy providers like asking, can we please talk to your graduates? Like, we're just desperate for graduates. And so there's no easy answers. Like, yeah, universities and training institutions have to value things that use science to grow food and not necessarily publish papers, but have impact, like the sort of impact that Angela was talking about, and value that and employ those kinds of people, and they will train the next generation of agronomists.
I heard a figure quoted that for every ag graduate we turn out today, there's 6 jobs. 6 jobs. And I've also heard that it's all the university's fault because they moved away from specialist ag degrees to sort of a bland ag 3-year degree. So you agree it's all the university's fault?
I think the universities are definitely culpable, but I would say it's more with who they chose to employ and value their employment rather than the nature of the degree, I would say. Sorry, going on for a bit of a waffle here, but the big disconnect, like I think there is a really good opportunity, and that is that there's a lot of young people that really want to study science and will enrol in science degrees, and often they're biological science degrees. And so we've got this real disconnect between agriculture that's screaming out for science-trained graduates, can't get any, and the ATAR of our agricultural degrees is sitting well below that of our science degrees. Yet we've got this pool of enthusiastic young people that want to study STEM. And we sort of need to sell the story that there's amazing science opportunities in agriculture, much more job opportunities and career opportunities than there is in the pure form of those sciences. So we've got to work out a way of connecting with those people that want to embark on a science degree and say, look, why don't you consider applying your science knowledge in an agricultural context? And
Angela, do you want to come in?
That's the key though, is apply. I think part of the problem is also the way we teach, because the type of people that are going to enjoy those roles, being on the ground with the farmers, doing that sort of thing, they want to learn by doing, not sitting in a lecture theatre. And so I also think there's an issue with the way we teach. So I think there should be some scope for getting that basic understanding in your first year or whatever, but then you should be thrown into an internship type approach where you're in the field with groups like myself and Steve, where you're actually on the ground and go and spend time with these agronomists and actually see what it involves and get a feel for the industry and actually get that knowledge, because that's the other thing. You spend 3 years in a lecture theatre, you're all of a sudden thrown out there and you're going to go and give advice to growers when you've never actually seen a crop. Good luck to you. And these farmers have got it, they've got a lot of money on the line. If you don't have some experience, you're going to really struggle. And I think so. Part of the problem is the way we're training as well.
And my experience as farmers is they have pretty good BS detectors when
They
someone
do.
comes on farm.
They do.
This is probably a good time to move to the audience because we've sort of slagged off enough groups now that you can hopefully defend yourselves or make a comment. So either online or in the audience, who would like to? I can see a couple of heads of agriculture groups here who might want to comment. Yeah, Ian.
I've got an online one, which is what are the keys to drive sustainability and profit together?
So what are the keys? I'll just repeat for the online, the keys to driving sustainability and profitability together. So James, I think you opened this one up, so I think you'll have to deal with it.
Often they're not hard to, often they're very well aligned, and it's usually around efficiency. If you can improve efficiency of your inputs, no matter what it is, whether it's fungicide or nitrogen fertilizer or manufacturing inputs, usually increasing both profitability and sustainability. And I guess the Australian agricultural sector has been really good at efficiency historically for competitive commercial reasons, and there's still more opportunity to achieve good double, triple bottom line that way.
Other question? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question on the whole training with the university. So, as a small research company, so as a consumer of students, I guess, one of the things that I often see is that you get graduates who have done really well at science at school, gone to universities, done really well at science at university, but they don't actually come out as a good scientist. So they actually know an enormous amount of knowledge about science, but actually having knowledge about science and then converting that to actually be a scientist is very different things. Actually working science, where you've suddenly got to work out what are the issues for the industry and then design an experiment which is going to address those issues and then come up with a solution and then give that to industry is incredibly different to actually studying science. And I was wondering, how do you bridge that gap so we don't have these ducks? So I've employed a number of people with ducks in uni and come out and I don't think they've actually made very good scientists. How do you change that focus?
Anyone want to take that one?
I'm willing to have a go.
Excellent.
So there's a number of things to unpack there, but when it comes back to Angela's point about the way we teach. So we're teaching people to get good marks. We're not actually teaching people the things they need to know to do their job. So that's, I think, reflected in that partly. Also things that are really hard to teach but really valuable, like critical thinking, which is often what it comes back to for situations like you're talking about, like understanding the farming system, critically working out what the constraints are and then doing an experiment to evaluate solutions to address that. That's not an easy thing to teach in a subject. It kind of, it requires a lot of time and the ability to assess that is also really difficult as well. So it's probably been too hard and people just haven't done it because they're under pressure to do all the other things that you're under pressure to do at a university.
I think as well, coming back to that, you can't teach it, but confidence goes a long way in all of these roles. Because, if you are going to get out there and be an agronomist, you've got to be confident in what you're telling growers to do. If you're going to try and sell your research, you need to be confident in what you're doing, or developing experiments, confidence, say, I think we should try this. You can't teach that. But I guess as a plug for your award, and as James said earlier, having things like this where you've got to sell yourself, put yourself out there, teaching that sort of skill can be valuable as well and help, I think, with some of those things that Steve sort of touched on is, really starting to use what you've been taught at uni and making things happen from there.
Can I also?
Sure, please.
Can I also add, I think with the chemical engineering department, the industry projects, also some of the industry placements, those can probably narrow down some of the gaps, because we have students that can directly work with real industry projects, and we often set up meetings with the industry people, and even actually some of the students actually go and work on site at the manufacturing facility. So that kind of exposed them to the working in the manufacturing kind of environment, and some of them even get direct employment after they graduate. So I guess more and more of these sort of projects can hopefully narrow down some of these gaps. And for myself personally, like when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I had some industry projects that increased my confidence, like as Angela was saying. But not only after I joined, I think the Innovation Hub, the projects are all industry projects. So I was directly thrown to kind of go to manufacturing sites and talk to cheesemakers, talk to manufacturers right away. But I think we also learn specifically when we are doing a job after that process, so during the work process as well. So, but I think I really like the industrial placements projects run within the university.
I'd plug two that I've come across, the Mighty program out of Monash University, where they put their engineers, so they put a group of engineers out into industry for I think it's something like a 4-month period. So they have to go out and find a problem and come up with, work it through. As you said, it ends up with a lot of them being employed in the industries that they work out. That's one, a good one. The other one is the, in Ag, is the Marcus Oldham program down at Geelong. It's a 3-year program, but the whole second year is spent on farm. So you've got a year, then you're on farm, and then you're back. So that's one I know Dairy has put a number of scholarships in there because we like the practicality of what that is, and we see that produced in the future. Dairy managers, people who can come out and manage a dairy farm. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, I've been thinking about wondering where you find funds for your research. How easy is it to get funds for your research? And where do you see your careers taking you? I haven't had enough wine to answer that.
Well, for me, pretty much most of my research comes from the Grains Research and Development Corporation, so the farmer level stuff. We have had a few projects with, so I've had some grants, internal grants, and that is one thing the university is good at, especially in that early career phase. They have a lot of early career research grants that you can apply for, which obviously then gets your name, looks good on your CV, gets you to start doing some of your own research. That helps. The Australian Research Council, their linkage programs for the research that we do is fantastic because we do have those links with industry. So I've had some success with that with chemical companies and things. So that's really a big advantage. In terms of my career, I don't know. Definitely not academic. The uni gives me the shits, to put it bluntly. I think there's some good aspects of it, but I don't agree with some of the things they do, and my research is very applied, and I do not think that's appreciated at the university.
All right, James, are we going to follow that theme? University, or are we going to?
I'm more recently employed by the university, so I haven't passed my confirmation yet, so I'm a bit more careful. Like Angela, almost all my funding for my entire career, right from PhD scholarship through now, has come through GRDC. So yeah, levies and government money together, mostly levies. I've never applied for an ARC grant in my life, and I don't think I have much chance. And it looks like a lottery to me. So hopefully I will continue to get funding from GRDC. I've had a few smaller grants from other government bodies. I really like working in grains research and doing that very applied research for grain growers. So as long as they continue to fund me, I'll continue to do that work. I guess after coming to a university, I used to work for CSIRO, the cropping group. So now I've got more of a teaching role. I also enjoy that and find that quite rewarding. So I guess a bit less research now and more teaching. Hopefully developing some agronomists that do that.
Lillian?
Yeah, I think both Angela and James mentioned all the research other funding agency like ARC. Although my first, I think my first 9 months was from Dairy Innovation Australia Limited, and then ARC, and then Dairy Innovation Hub, but also from research contracts and consultancy that we perform for dairy manufacturers. So we are very lucky to get continuous business and repeat business from these dairy manufacturers that also help the funding to the group. And we have a fantastic director that, Sally Grass was sitting here too, who is very good in getting all these fundings from different sources. So yeah, it really helped me to focus on my work, because I know that there's always funding from manufacturers and also from ARC and other sites.
All right, Tony.
I was going to ask my background years ago in this sort of area. It strikes me there seems to be a failure now of the state and federal primary industries departments to actually do the work that you're doing. Because it strikes me that this is very much a market failure. You have in fact a situation where what you're doing is establishing the science that actually creates wealth in the industry, and yet you're not talking about getting money from either the Victorian or the federal primary industries. And this, as I recall, 30 or 40 years ago, used to be what they were supposed to do.
Well, again, I don't think I've had enough wine for this conversation.
Because it's not really a university function to actually be doing exactly what you're doing as such. They don't see, as you say, they don't see themselves in that role.
Yeah, I mean,
it's clearly a state and federal responsibility to actually maintain this technological edge.
I mean, what we don't have here that a lot of people might think about in this context is land grant universities, like in the US, which actually have a responsibility to do extension. We don't actually have that in our university system, so it does it. So extension, this is in your camp?
Yeah, well, we're based at the Grains Innovation Park in Horsham with the State Department, and yeah, we don't have any competition with them for our research, which is a good thing for us. But I completely acknowledge what you're saying, and I don't know what the solution is. I think extension-wise, I'm very fortunate that I work closely with Steve, and Steve's always had that extension side of things covered, and so our research does get out there. He speaks to, I don't know how many grower groups a day. In the last month, we probably had 100 or 150 agronomists come through and see our research, like see our experiments physically. We talk them through it. So we do have that ability to actually get our research taken up, because we can physically show them, here's a plant that doesn't have any resistance, here's one that does, this one's dead, this one's not. And so we are very fortunate to be able to do that extension side of things. But like I said, once upon a time, the State Department had agronomists, they had pathologists, they had breeders, and they don't have any of those things anymore. So it's, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there's no doubt in dairy, Victorian stepped back. DA picked that up. We've got about 60 people out in the regions now in the RDPs doing extension work. Probably the one that's having a very active debate at the moment is biosecurity. This has always traditionally been a government area and still is. We're seeing the government, foot and mouth, lumpy skin disease. There is money being put back in, and people probably would say that's overdue on the biosecurity area. So that's probably one of the ones that's going to get a bit of a boost and a necessary boost with the potential threats. I think we've about run out of time, so we might wrap it up. Hope you feel that the award that the Academies has supported through with Doug Shear has been worthy. You've seen the sort of calibre of people that we're supporting. And obviously this is part of actually making sure that we give the other part. Not only do we give awards, but we actually give a platform for people to come back and talk to us about what is actually happening in this field. So I'd like you all to join me in just thanking our three speakers tonight. And I think we're wrapped.
Yes, thank you, Paul. No, I'll just quickly finish by saying thank you to Paul himself. Give him a round of applause for sharing. seminar will be on quantum technology, and then we have our commencement dinner, which will feature Emma Johnston talking about the State of the Environment report that she was a key author on. So that'll be coming up next year. I invite you all to come along. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to our visitors tonight. Thank you for coming.